Welcome to Story Planet, where we bring you calming and inspiring tales to help you unwind. Tonight's story is The Lost Island. Let the weight of the day fade away as you settle in for a tale of resilience, discovery, and hope. Close your eyes if you wish, take a deep breath, and let the gentle rhythm of this story guide you to a place of peace and wonder. Now, let's begin. The horizon stretched endlessly, a vast blue expanse that kissed the clouds at its edges. Marina had always loved the serenity of the skies. As a seasoned pilot, she often felt that flying wasn't just her profession, it was her sanctuary. This flight, however, had a different weight to it. It was her last assignment before a long overdue break. Her cargo plane hummed steadily, laden with supplies destined for a remote island chain. The sun glimmered on the ocean below, its surface shimmering like molten silver. Marina's hands rested lightly on the controls, her mind wandering to the small cabin she had rented for her upcoming vacation. She had dreamed of peaceful days, uninterrupted by schedules, where she could watch sunsets without the roar of engines in her ears. Little did she know, fate had other plans. The first sign was a distant flicker on the radar. A storm system, small but unpredictable, loomed ahead. Marina's brow furrowed as she adjusted her course slightly to avoid it. The voice of air traffic control crackled in her headset, issuing a mild warning. She acknowledged it with calm professionalism, her experience giving her confidence. Storms were part of the job, a challenge she had faced many times. But this storm was no ordinary challenge. As she approached, the once distant clouds swelled, darkening the horizon with menacing speed. Winds began to buffet the aircraft. Gentle at first, but growing stronger with each passing moment. Marina tightened her grip on the controls, her focus sharpening. Lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the brewing chaos. The plane shuddered as turbulence gripped it, tossing it like a toy in the hands of an angry child. Rain lashed against the windshield, obscuring her view. The instruments flickered, their readings erratic. A cold dread seeped into Marina's chest. She radioed for assistance, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her resolve. The response was garbled, fragmented by static. She was on her own. "Stay calm, Marina," she muttered to herself, her voice barely audible over the roar of the storm. "You've got this." The storm's fury intensified, and a deafening crack of thunder jolted her. A sudden downdraft sent the plane plunging, the altimeter spinning wildly. Marina fought the controls, her muscles straining against the unrelenting force of the wind. Her mind raced through emergency protocols. The ocean loomed closer, its surface a churning cauldron of waves. In that moment, the realization hit her. She had no choice but to attempt an emergency landing. A speck of land appeared on the radar, a solitary dot in the vast expanse of water. It wasn't marked on her maps, but it was her only chance. "Hold together," she whispered to the aircraft as if willing it to obey. She deployed the landing gear, though she doubted it would make much difference. The plane's descent was rapid, the winds merciless. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears as she aimed for the patch of land, praying it was solid enough to hold. The impact was violent. The plane skidded across the uneven terrain, its frame groaning in protest before coming to a jarring halt. Marina's head snapped forward, her body restrained by the harness. For a moment, the world was silent, except for the pounding of the rain. She exhaled shakily, her hands trembling as they released the controls. Her body ached, but she was alive. Unbuckling the harness, she stumbled out of the cockpit. The air was thick with the scent of salt and rain, mingled with the acrid smell of overheated metal. The storm raged on, but Marina's focus was singular. She needed to assess her surroundings and find shelter before darkness fell. The island, if it could even be called that, was small, its landscape a mix of rocky shores and dense vegetation. Waves crashed violently against the cliffs, sending sprays of foam into the air. Drenched and shivering, Marina gathered a few essential items from the plane's wreckage: a survival kit, a flashlight, and a water bottle. She slung the kit over her shoulder and turned toward the jungle, its shadows deep and foreboding. Every step felt heavier as the reality of her situation sank in. She was stranded. Alone. The jungle seemed alive, its foliage rustling with unseen movements. Marina's instincts told her to stay near the shore, but the driving rain offered no mercy. She pushed forward, seeking refuge beneath the canopy of trees. The dense leaves muted the storm's roar, creating an eerie stillness. Finding a small clearing, she dropped to her knees, her exhaustion overwhelming her. For the first time, tears pricked her eyes, though she quickly wiped them away. She needed to stay strong. Survival depended on it. As the storm rumbled on, Marina leaned back against a tree, her thoughts racing. The vastness of the ocean surrounded her, isolating her from the world she once knew. Yet, amidst the fear, a spark of determination flickered within her. "I'll make it," she whispered to the night. "I have to." And so began her journey, not just to survive, but to discover the strength she never knew she possessed. Marina woke with a start, her body stiff and chilled from the damp forest floor. The first rays of morning sunlight filtered through the dense canopy above, creating a mosaic of light and shadow. The storm had passed, leaving behind an eerie stillness that seemed to amplify every rustle and chirp in the jungle. She shifted, her muscles protesting after a night of tension and unfamiliar ground. Her stomach growled, a stark reminder of the reality she faced. She needed food, water, and a plan. Tugging her survival kit closer, she retrieved the small bottle of water and sipped sparingly, knowing it wouldn't last long. The immediate task was clear: find a reliable water source. Marina retraced her steps toward the faint sound of flowing water she had heard in the chaos of the previous night. The dense jungle greeted her with an overwhelming array of colors and sounds. The vibrant greens of the foliage, the occasional burst of flowers, and the cacophony of unseen creatures. Despite its beauty, the jungle felt oppressive, its secrets lurking just beyond her line of sight. The stream appeared suddenly, a ribbon of crystal-clear water cutting through the dense undergrowth. Relief washed over her as she knelt by its edge, cupping her hands to drink deeply. The water was cool and pure, soothing the dryness in her throat. She filled her bottle and paused, taking a moment to appreciate the small victory. But as she glanced around, something caught her eye. Footprints. They were faint but unmistakable, pressed into the soft mud near the bank. Marina's heart skipped. The prints were not human, at least not entirely. They were larger, with claw-like impressions at the toes. She knelt, studying them closely, her mind racing through possibilities. A large predator? An unknown creature? She couldn't be sure, but the implications were unnerving. She wasn't alone on this island. The discovery pushed her into action. Returning to her makeshift shelter, Marina resolved to fortify it. Using branches and vines, she reinforced the lean-to, creating a rudimentary barrier around the clearing. It wasn't much, but it offered a small sense of security. Survival wasn't just about food and water, it was about preparing for the unknown. Her next task was food. The survival kit contained a knife and a small guide to edible plants. Armed with this knowledge, she ventured into the jungle, scanning for anything resembling the illustrations. The first success came in the form of small, bright red fruits hanging from a low bush. Matching them to the guide, Marina identified them as safe to eat. She cautiously tried one, its tart sweetness a welcome sensation. Gathering more, she returned to her shelter with a modest supply. As the sun climbed higher, the oppressive heat of the jungle began to take its toll. Marina retreated to the shade, her thoughts drifting as she rested. She couldn't shake the image of the footprints. What kind of island was this? The question lingered, fueling a sense of unease that coiled in her chest. Later that afternoon, Marina decided to explore further along the stream. With her knife in hand and her senses on high alert, she moved cautiously through the jungle. The air was thick with the scent of earth and vegetation, every step accompanied by the crunch of leaves and the occasional snap of a twig. She marked her path with strips of fabric torn from her shirt, ensuring she could find her way back. Her exploration led her to a small clearing where the stream widened into a shallow pool. The water sparkled in the dappled sunlight, its surface disturbed only by the occasional ripple from unseen fish. Marina knelt to refill her bottle and paused, her gaze drawn to something glinting beneath the surface. Reaching in, she retrieved a small, rusted object. It was a belt buckle, encrusted with age, but unmistakably man-made. Marina turned it over in her hands, her mind racing. Someone had been here before. Perhaps they still were. The thought sent a shiver down her spine, equal parts hope and fear. If there were others on the island, they could be a source of help or danger. As the day waned, Marina returned to her shelter, the belt buckle tucked safely in her pocket. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, but also an acute awareness of her vulnerability. The jungle's shadows grew longer, the sounds of its inhabitants shifting as day gave way to night. She lit a small fire, its flickering light a fragile shield against the encroaching darkness. That night, Marina's dreams were vivid and restless. She saw faces she didn't recognize, heard voices calling her name, and felt the weight of unseen eyes watching her. She woke several times, the stillness of the jungle pressing in on her. The footprints, the belt buckle, the strange sense of being observed, it all pointed to one undeniable truth. The island held secrets, and Marina was determined to uncover them. But for now, she focused on surviving one day at a time, her determination growing stronger with each challenge she faced. As the fire crackled softly and the stars emerged in the sky above, Marina whispered a quiet promise to herself. I will find a way. No matter what, I will make it. Marina's hands trembled slightly as she gathered the last of the branches for her shelter. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the island bathed in hues of amber and deepening violet. Her hastily constructed lean-to had provided some protection the previous night, but it wasn't enough. She needed something sturdier, a place to shield her from the unpredictable weather and whatever unseen dangers the island might hold. The fire crackled softly, a modest flame surrounded by a circle of stones she had scavenged earlier. Its light danced on the nearby trees, casting flickering shadows that seemed alive. The jungle around her had grown eerily quiet, save for the occasional distant call of a bird or the rustle of leaves in the wind. It was a silence that both calmed and unnerved her. She worked methodically, her movements deliberate, using larger branches as a frame and layering them with broad leaves she had collected during the day. Marina constructed a more permanent shelter against the trunk of a sturdy tree. The tree's massive roots provided a natural barrier on one side, giving her an added sense of security. She tied the branches together with lengths of vine, her fingers raw from the effort. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. As the shelter took shape, her mind wandered back to the footprints by the stream and the rusted belt buckle she had found. Someone, or something, had been here before her. The thought stirred a mixture of curiosity and dread. Was it an animal, a previous survivor, or something else entirely? She had no answers, only questions that seemed to multiply with each passing hour. Finally, Marina stepped back and surveyed her work. The shelter wasn't much to look at, but it felt like a small triumph in an otherwise overwhelming situation. She crawled inside, the leafy walls enclosing her in a cocoon of green. It smelled of earth and vegetation, a grounding contrast to the salty tang of the ocean air that lingered beyond the jungle. Her stomach growled, reminding her of the berries she had gathered earlier. She reached for the small bundle she had tied with a strip of cloth and carefully ate a handful. The tart sweetness brought a moment of comfort, a reminder that even in this unfamiliar place, there were small things to be grateful for. The stars began to emerge, one by one, punctuating the inky blackness of the night sky. Marina lay on her back, gazing through the gaps in the shelter's roof at the constellations above. They were the same stars she had seen countless times from her cockpit. But tonight, they felt different. Out here, isolated and vulnerable, they seemed brighter, closer, as if trying to offer her solace. As the night deepened, the temperature dropped, and Marina pulled her jacket tighter around her. The fire's warmth was a welcome reprieve from the chill that seeped through the jungle. She fed it small pieces of driftwood she had collected earlier, watching the flames dance and crackle. The sound was comforting, a reminder of human presence in a place that felt so alien. Her thoughts drifted to her family and friends, the people who had no idea where she was or what had happened. Were they searching for her? Did they even know she was missing yet? The ache of loneliness settled in her chest, a heaviness that was almost unbearable. But she pushed it aside, focusing instead on the tasks ahead. Tomorrow, she would need to explore further, find more food, and begin to understand the island that had become her unchosen home. Sleep came slowly, her mind a whirlwind of fears and plans. When she finally drifted off, her dreams were vivid and fragmented. She saw the footprints again, larger and clearer this time, leading her to a cave hidden deep within the jungle. Inside, she found remnants of a life, a rusted lantern, a stack of faded journals, and the faint outline of a map scrawled on the wall. The images were so real that she woke with a start, her heart pounding. The fire had dwindled to embers, casting a faint orange glow on her shelter. The jungle was alive again, its nocturnal inhabitants stirring in the shadows. Marina lay still, listening to the sounds of the night, the chirp of insects, the distant hoot of an owl, and the rustling of leaves that hinted at unseen creatures moving through the undergrowth. Despite the unease that lingered from her dream, she felt a growing sense of determination. This island was no longer just a place she had crashed onto. It was a puzzle to be solved, a challenge to overcome. The footprints, the buckle, the strange sense of being watched, they were pieces of a story she was now a part of. And Marina was nothing if not resilient. Before she closed her eyes again, she whispered into the darkness, a promise to herself and to the island. I'll survive this. I'll figure out its secrets, and I'll find my way home. Marina awoke to the soft murmuring of the jungle, a soundscape layered with the rustling of leaves, the distant trill of unfamiliar birds, and something else, something faint yet insistent. It wasn't the harmonious chatter of the forest, but a low melodic hum, as if the island itself were alive and singing. She sat up, her muscles stiff from sleep, and strained to identify the direction of the sound. Her shelter, a lean-to of branches and leaves, offered scant protection against the elements, but it had served its purpose through the night. The jungle's morning light was soft, painting the damp foliage in shades of gold and green. The hum pulsed faintly, drawing her focus again. It seemed to come from deeper within the jungle, and with every passing second, it grew harder to ignore. Curiosity and caution warred within her. She had planned to spend the day securing more food and water near the stream, but this sound, this mystery, demanded attention. Securing her knife at her belt and her makeshift satchel over her shoulder, Marina doused the embers of her fire and set out. The jungle's labyrinthine paths twisted unpredictably, each step forcing her to push aside vines and maneuver around the massive roots of ancient trees. Her breath quickened as the hum grew louder, resonating through the air with a rhythmic cadence. It was neither threatening nor soothing, merely persistent, as though it carried some unknown purpose. As the hours wore on, the terrain became more challenging. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in scattered beams, illuminating patches of vibrant flowers and moss-covered stones. Despite the beauty, Marina's focus remained sharp. She marked her path with small notches carved into tree trunks, ensuring she could find her way back. The hum drew her to a clearing. It was unlike any place she had encountered before. In its center stood a tree larger than any she had seen, its massive roots spreading outward like the arms of a guardian. At its base was a hollow, partially obscured by vines and moss. The hum seemed to emanate from this ancient sentinel, vibrating faintly through the ground beneath her feet. She approached cautiously, her pulse quickening. The tree's bark was etched with symbols, intricate patterns that seemed both deliberate and ancient. They spiraled and interlocked in ways that defied immediate understanding. Marina reached out, brushing her fingers against the grooves, and the hum abruptly ceased. The silence that followed was profound, as if the jungle itself were holding its breath. Marina froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Then, from within the hollow, a faint breeze emerged, carrying with it the scent of something metallic and aged. She stepped back instinctively, clutching her knife. The stillness was broken by a rustling sound behind her. Marina spun, her knife raised, but saw nothing but the dense foliage swaying slightly in the wind. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. For long moments she remained motionless, her eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. When nothing emerged, she turned back to the tree. Determined to document her discovery, Marina retrieved a small notepad and pencil from her satchel. She sketched the symbols as best she could and jotted down notes about the hum, the clearing, and the strange scent. If she ever escaped this island, these records might provide answers, or at least proof of what she had experienced. Her thoughts were interrupted by another rustle, this time accompanied by a faint, fleeting shadow at the edge of her vision. She called out, her voice firm despite the unease twisting in her stomach. "Who's there?" No response came, only the jungle's ambient noise. Marina tightened her grip on the knife, her senses heightened. She backed away from the tree slowly, keeping her eyes on the surrounding foliage. Whatever, or whoever, was out there, she had no intention of confronting it unprepared. The journey back to her shelter was a tense one. The path she had marked earlier provided reassurance, but the feeling of being followed lingered. Several times she paused, listening intently, but the jungle's sounds revealed nothing unusual. By the time she reached the safety of her clearing, the sun had climbed high into the sky, casting dappled light across her makeshift camp. Marina relit her fire and sat down to review her notes. The symbols on the tree, the hum, and the faint breeze from the hollow, it all pointed to something more than mere survival. The island wasn't just a hostile environment, it was a place steeped in mystery, its secrets waiting to be uncovered. Her thoughts returned to the fleeting shadow in the clearing. Was it an animal, a person, or something else entirely? She couldn't be sure, but the encounter had left her more determined than ever. Whatever this island held, she would face it, and she would survive. That night, as the fire crackled and the jungle's nocturnal symphony filled the air, Marina lay in her shelter, staring at the stars through gaps in the canopy. Her dreams were restless, filled with swirling symbols and the haunting melody of the hum. When she awoke, one thought lingered in her mind. This island wasn't just a prison, it was a puzzle, and Marina was determined to solve it, no matter the cost. The sun rose slowly, painting the jungle with strokes of gold and amber. Marina's mind was still clouded by the restless dreams of the night before. Visions of swirling symbols, the resonant hum of the tree, and shadowy figures watching from the periphery. She shook the remnants of sleep from her thoughts and focused on the tasks ahead. Survival demanded structure and purpose, and today would be no different. Marina assessed her supplies. The berries she had gathered were dwindling, and her water supply was nearly gone. The stream she had found earlier would provide more water, but the jungle's unpredictable dangers loomed in her mind. She needed to ensure she had a way to navigate her surroundings efficiently while staying alert to whatever might be tracking her. With her knife and satchel in hand, she set out toward the stream. The jungle greeted her with its usual cacophony of bird calls and rustling leaves, but Marina's senses were heightened, her ears straining for any sound out of place. As she walked, she continued to carve small notches into tree trunks, a trail of breadcrumbs to guide her back to camp. Each mark felt like a lifeline, a small reassurance in the vast, unknowable wilderness. Reaching the stream, Marina knelt by the water's edge, refilling her bottle and taking a few sips. The cool liquid refreshed her, clearing the last fog of sleep from her mind. She paused, staring into the stream's clear depths. The faint reflection of her face stared back, framed by the green shadows of the jungle. She looked tired, thinner than she had been days ago. But in her eyes, she saw something new. A glint of determination, an unyielding spark that refused to be extinguished. Her moment of introspection was interrupted by movement in the water. Small fish darted about, their silver bodies catching the sunlight. Marina's stomach growled, and she realized she would need more than berries to sustain her strength. Fishing had never been a skill she'd thought necessary, but necessity was the greatest teacher. She scanned her surroundings, gathering long, flexible branches and vines to fashion a makeshift spear. The process was slow and frustrating. Her first few attempts at fishing ended in failure, the spear splashing into the water uselessly as the fish scattered. But Marina persisted, adjusting her stance and timing. Finally, with a quick thrust, she managed to impale a small fish. She pulled it from the water, the sight of her catch filling her with a rush of pride. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Returning to her shelter, Marina lit a small fire and cooked the fish carefully. The aroma was enough to make her mouth water, and the first bite was heavenly, despite its simplicity. The warmth of the meal spread through her body, revitalizing her. For the first time since her crash, she felt a small semblance of control, as though she were beginning to understand the island's rhythm. After eating, Marina turned her attention to improving her tools. She used stones to sharpen her knife and experimented with crafting stronger spears. The jungle provided an abundance of resources, but it also required her to think creatively. She fashioned a small carrying pouch from strips of bark and vine, allowing her to gather and transport food more easily. Each new creation felt like a step forward, a tangible sign of her progress. As the afternoon wore on, Marina's thoughts returned to the symbols on the tree and the hum that had led her to it. She retrieved her notepad, flipping through the sketches and notes she had made. The patterns were intricate, almost mathematical in their precision. She traced them with her finger, trying to decipher their meaning. Were they a language? A map? A warning? The questions gnawed at her, their answers tantalizingly out of reach. Deciding she needed a clearer perspective, Marina climbed a nearby hill she had noticed on her previous foraging trips. The ascent was steep, the jungle's thick undergrowth clawing at her legs, but she pushed forward. Reaching the top, she was rewarded with a breathtaking view of the island. The jungle stretched endlessly in all directions, a sea of green broken only by the occasional clearing or rocky outcrop. To the west, she spotted the glimmer of the ocean, its waves sparkling in the sunlight. To the east, the terrain grew rockier, the vegetation sparser. And in the distance, shrouded in mist, she saw what appeared to be a ridge or plateau, a place that seemed almost deliberately separate from the rest of the island. Marina's gaze lingered on the ridge. Something about it called to her, much like the hum of the tree had. It was a place she needed to explore, though she knew it would be a difficult journey. She made a mental note to prepare for the trek, ensuring she had enough food, water, and tools to sustain her. Whatever secrets the island held, she was determined to uncover them. As she descended the hill, Marina noticed the shadows growing longer. The jungle's vibrant colors dulled as the sun dipped toward the horizon. She quickened her pace, returning to her shelter just as the first stars began to appear. Relighting her fire, she settled in for the night, her thoughts filled with plans for the days ahead. The jungle's nocturnal symphony enveloped her as she lay beneath her shelter. The distant calls of animals, the rustling of leaves, and the soft crackle of the fire created a strangely comforting rhythm. Marina closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling her into sleep. Her dreams were vivid once more, filled with swirling symbols and the haunting melody of the hum. But this time, the dreams carried a sense of direction, as though guiding her toward something just beyond her grasp. When she awoke, the first light of dawn filtering through the trees, Marina felt a renewed sense of purpose. This island was testing her, challenging her in ways she had never imagined. But with each passing day, she was learning to adapt, to survive, and to listen to the language of the island. And she knew, deep in her heart, that the answers she sought were out there, waiting for her to find them. Marina's routine had begun to resemble a rhythm. Wake with the sun, search for food, explore cautiously, and retreat to her shelter by nightfall. The island was no longer an entirely alien terrain, but its mysteries still loomed large. And today, Marina's steps carried her toward the rocky ridge she had seen from the hilltop the day before, her mind racing with possibilities. The trek was grueling, the rocky terrain littered with loose stones and jagged outcrops. The jungle thinned as she ascended, replaced by shorter shrubs and patches of dry grass. Marina paused frequently, scanning the horizon for any sign of danger or discovery. The ridge loomed closer with each step, its surface jagged yet inviting in its promise of answers. As she rounded a corner, the faint sound of distress broke through the silence. Marina froze, straining to identify the source. It came again, weak, plaintive, almost like a cry for help. Her heart quickened. Was someone else here? Or was it an animal? She adjusted her grip on her knife and followed the sound, her steps cautious but deliberate. The noise led her to a small crevice nestled between two towering boulders. There, tangled in a mass of debris and vines, was a bird. Its wings fluttered weakly, and one leg was caught in a twisted piece of wire, likely a remnant from some long-forgotten wreckage. The bird's feathers were sleek and dark, with a faint iridescent sheen that caught the sunlight. Its intelligent eyes met Marina's, filled with a mix of fear and desperation. Marina hesitated. The bird was clearly in pain, and approaching too quickly might worsen its panic. She crouched low, her movements slow and deliberate, speaking softly as if the creature might understand. "It's okay," she murmured. "I'm here to help." The bird flinched as she reached for the wire, its beak snapping defensively. Marina withdrew her hand, waiting a moment before trying again. This time, she used her knife to carefully cut through the tangled vines first, creating more space to maneuver. The bird's struggles lessened as if sensing her intentions. It took several tense minutes, but eventually, Marina freed the bird's leg from the wire. The creature stumbled, its wings flapping erratically as it tried to take flight. Marina stepped back, giving it space. The bird managed a short hop before collapsing onto the ground, exhausted but alive. Marina stayed with the bird for a while, watching as it regained its strength. She tore a strip from her shirt, fashioned it into a small sling, and gently secured the bird's injured leg. It wouldn't be able to fly far, but at least it was safe from further harm. The bird watched her with unblinking eyes, and in that moment, Marina felt a strange connection. A sense of shared struggle in the face of adversity. Deciding she couldn't leave the bird behind, Marina fashioned a small carrying pouch from her satchel and placed the bird inside. It protested weakly at first, but soon settled, its head peeking out as she resumed her journey toward the ridge. The ascent grew steeper, and Marina's legs burned with the effort. The ridge was closer now, its rocky surface revealing faint cracks and crevices that seemed almost man-made. As she approached, she noticed something etched into the stone, a series of grooves and symbols similar to those she had seen on the tree. Her breath caught. This was no natural formation. The ridge was part of something larger, something intentional. Marina traced the symbols with her fingers, their texture rough and weathered. She pulled out her notepad and sketched them carefully, comparing them to the ones from the tree. There were similarities, but these markings were more intricate, more deliberate. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were trying to tell her something. The bird stirred in its pouch, letting out a soft chirp that echoed against the stone. Marina glanced down at it and smiled faintly. "We're figuring this out together, huh?" she said. The bird blinked, its iridescent feathers catching the light. Exploring further, Marina discovered a narrow opening in the ridge. It was dark inside, the air cool and faintly metallic. She hesitated at the threshold, her instincts warning her to proceed carefully. Adjusting her grip on her knife, she stepped into the passage, her footsteps echoing softly. The passage widened into a small chamber. Shafts of light filtered through cracks in the stone above, illuminating the space in a pale glow. In the center of the chamber was a pedestal, its surface covered in more of the strange symbols. Around it were scattered remnants, broken pottery, scraps of fabric, and what appeared to be a rusted compass. Marina approached the pedestal cautiously. The symbols were deeply carved, their edges sharp despite the wear of time. She placed a hand on the surface, feeling the grooves beneath her fingertips. The bird chirped again, its voice startlingly loud in the stillness. Marina smiled wryly. "You're not exactly subtle, are you?" She picked up the rusted compass, turning it over in her hands. It was badly corroded, but the needle still wavered faintly, as if drawn to some unseen force. Marina pocketed it, her mind racing with possibilities. Who had built this place? And why had it been abandoned? The bird let out a sudden squawk, its body tensing in the pouch. Marina froze, her grip tightening on the knife. The air felt heavier, charged with a presence she couldn't see but could almost feel. She turned slowly, scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. The chamber was silent, but the sense of being watched was undeniable. Deciding not to linger, Marina retraced her steps out of the chamber and back into the open air. The sunlight was blinding after the dimness of the passage, and she took a moment to steady herself. The bird relaxed slightly, nestling deeper into its pouch. The trek back to her shelter was slower, the weight of the discovery and the questions it raised settling heavily on Marina's shoulders. By the time she returned, the sun was dipping low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the jungle. She set the bird down gently, offering it some water from her bottle. It drank hesitantly, its eyes never leaving her. As night fell, Marina sat by her fire, the compass in one hand and her notepad in the other. The symbols from the ridge and the tree swirled in her mind, fragments of a puzzle she was determined to solve. The bird rested beside her, its breathing steady as it drifted to sleep. For the first time since her crash, Marina felt a glimmer of hope. She wasn't alone, not entirely. The bird was a small but vital companion, a reminder that even in isolation, connection was possible. And the ridge had shown her that the island held more than just challenges. It held answers. Marina gazed into the fire, her determination unwavering. Tomorrow she would return to the ridge and delve deeper into its mysteries. She didn't know what she would find, but she was ready to face it, step by step, with her newfound ally by her side. Diverted from her light sleep, the first rays of dawn crept over the horizon, bathing the jungle in a golden glow. Marina stirred from her light sleep, the bird beside her still nestled comfortably in its makeshift sling. Its injured leg was healing slowly, but its spirit seemed unbroken. Marina stretched, her body aching from the previous day's exertion. Today, she resolved, would be a day for gathering resources and exploring further afield. The discovery at the ridge weighed heavily on her mind. The etched symbols, the rusted compass, and the charged atmosphere in the chamber had left her with more questions than answers. What purpose did the ridge serve? And what force had compelled her there in the first place? These thoughts churned in her mind as she set about rekindling her fire and preparing for the day ahead. With the bird perched carefully in its pouch, Marina ventured toward the island's shoreline. The ridge had provided a vantage point the day before, and she remembered glimpsing a stretch of beach strewn with debris. If remnants from a wreck or supplies had washed ashore, they might offer vital clues or resources to aid her survival. The jungle thinned as she approached the beach, the air growing salty and cool. The rhythmic crash of waves greeted her, a sound that felt both familiar and foreign in the stillness of her isolation. The sand was warm beneath her feet, dotted with clusters of driftwood, seaweed, and shells. Among the scattered remnants, one object caught her eye immediately. A piece of wooden planking, worn smooth by the tide but bearing faint, carved letters. Marina knelt to examine the plank. The letters were faded, but she could just make out a word: endurance. Her breath hitched. Was it the name of a ship? Or perhaps a message left behind by someone who had been here before her? The thought sent a chill down her spine. If others had been stranded here, what had become of them? She collected the plank and continued along the shoreline, her eyes scanning for anything out of place. The bird let out an occasional chirp, its sharp eyes catching movement in the surf. Marina followed its gaze and spotted a bundle tangled in seaweed, half buried in the sand. Pulling it free, she found a battered leather bag, its surface cracked and weathered. The clasp was rusted but gave way with a firm tug. Inside, she found a treasure trove of small items: a coil of twine, a fishing hook, a waterproof match container, and a journal. The pages of the journal were damp and partially illegible, but some entries had survived. Marina flipped through them, her heart pounding. The handwriting was jagged, the words hurried. The storm came without warning. Waves like mountains. We've run aground, no sign of the others. Another entry further down. This island, it's not natural. There's something watching, always watching. The hum. The words trailed off, the ink smudged beyond recognition. Marina closed the journal, her mind racing. The hum. Whoever had written this had experienced the same phenomenon she had. Her hands trembled as she placed the journal in her satchel, the weight of its words pressing down on her. She wasn't the first to encounter the island's mysteries, and she might not be the last. Her exploration continued, yielding smaller finds: shards of pottery, rusted metal scraps, and pieces of rope hardened by salt water. Each item told a fragment of a story, one that hinted at lives interrupted and struggles endured. But the wooden plank and the journal stood out, their implications too significant to ignore. As Marina made her way back to her shelter, her mind replayed the journal's words. Always watching. The thought unnerved her, stirring memories of the strange presence she had felt at the ridge. The island seemed alive, its secrets woven into every corner of its landscape. And yet, despite the fear that simmered beneath her resolve, Marina felt a growing determination. If she was to survive and escape, she needed to understand the island's language, its patterns, and its history. Back at her camp, Marina laid out her findings. The plank, the journal, the twine, and the hook were all valuable in different ways. She worked methodically, using the twine and hook to fashion a rudimentary fishing line. The ocean teemed with life, and she knew this tool could provide a more sustainable source of food. The bird chirped softly, its gaze fixed on the wooden plank. Marina smiled faintly. "You've got an eye for mysteries too, huh?" she said, running her fingers over the carved letters. The bird tilted its head, as if in agreement. As night fell, Marina sat by the fire, the journal open in her lap. She traced the faded words with her fingers, piecing together what little she could. The entries were fragmented, but they spoke of resilience and despair, of hope and fear. Whoever had written them had fought to survive, just as she was now. And though their fate remained unknown, their words offered Marina a strange comfort, a reminder that she wasn't entirely alone in her struggle. The stars emerged one by one, their light reflected in the calm waters of the ocean. Marina leaned back against the trunk of a tree, her thoughts a swirling mix of fear and hope. The island held more questions than answers, but each discovery brought her closer to understanding its mysteries, and with each step, she felt her resolve strengthen. As the fire crackled and the bird nestled beside her, Marina whispered to the night, "I'll figure this out, no matter what it takes." The skies darkened ominously, casting an unsettling shadow over the jungle. Marina felt the first hints of a coming storm long before the winds began to stir. The once still air grew heavy and charged, making the small hairs on her arms stand on end. The bird in its sling chirped nervously, as if sensing the change. She glanced toward the horizon, where angry gray clouds churned, moving swiftly toward the island. The last storm had been violent and unrelenting, and Marina wasn't about to face another one unprepared. Her mind raced as she evaluated her shelter. It had held up so far, but the thought of the winds tearing through the jungle made her uneasy. Gathering her tools, Marina worked quickly to reinforce the structure. She secured the leafy walls with additional vines and placed heavy stones around the base to anchor it. Her fire pit, painstakingly built and tended, was doused to avoid spreading flames in case of a gale. The bird chirped again, hopping in its sling as if to warn her of time slipping away. "All right, I hear you," she muttered, her hands working fast to weave additional branches into her shelter's frame. "We're almost there." By the time the first gust of wind reached her clearing, Marina had fortified her lean-to as much as she could. She grabbed her most valuable items, the journal, her knife, and her makeshift fishing line, and placed them inside her satchel. The bird hopped free of its sling and flapped awkwardly, perching on her shoulder. She felt a small swell of comfort from its presence. The storm struck with a ferocity that stole her breath. The winds howled through the jungle, bending trees and tearing leaves from their branches. Rain fell in sheets, cold and unrelenting, drenching her within moments. Marina huddled inside her shelter, clutching the satchel tightly as the storm roared around her. The sound was deafening, a relentless cacophony of wind and water. Her thoughts drifted to the journal entries she had read. The storm came without warning. She wondered if the previous writer had faced something like this, an overwhelming force of nature that left little room for hope. But Marina had learned something in her time on the island. She was stronger than she had ever realized, and she would endure this, just as she had endured everything else. The hours dragged on as the storm raged. Rainwater seeped through the gaps in her shelter, soaking the ground beneath her. Marina shifted uncomfortably, her muscles tense and her body cold. The bird nestled closer to her neck, its feathers ruffled but determined to stay by her side. She whispered soft reassurances, more for herself than for the bird. "It'll pass," she murmured. "Storms always do." Eventually the winds began to lessen, their howls giving way to muted rustling. The rain softened to a steady patter, and the oppressive weight in the air lifted. Marina exhaled a shaky breath, her body relaxing for the first time in hours. She stepped cautiously out of the shelter, the bird hopping to the ground beside her. The jungle was a changed landscape. Branches and debris littered the ground, and the air smelled of wet earth and salt. The storm had stripped away some of the jungle's dense foliage, revealing paths she hadn't noticed before. Marina's eyes lingered on one such path, curiosity flickering through her exhaustion. She spent the morning salvaging what she could. Her shelter had held up better than expected, though it would need repairs. The fire pit was intact, but her supply of dry wood was gone. Still, Marina considered it a victory. The storm had tested her, and she had endured. As the sun broke through the clouds, illuminating the soaked jungle, Marina decided to follow the newly revealed path. The bird flapped its wings, now strong enough to hover briefly before landing again. It chirped as if encouraging her, its bright eyes fixed on the path ahead. The trail wound through the jungle, leading her deeper into the island's heart. The air felt different here, cooler and fresher, as if untouched by the chaos of the storm. Marina noticed small details she hadn't seen before: clusters of vibrant flowers, a faint trickle of water nearby, and more of the strange symbols carved into tree trunks. The path ended at a small clearing, where a rock formation jutted from the earth like a natural altar. On its surface were more symbols, similar to those she had seen at the ridge, but arranged in a different pattern. Marina approached cautiously, her knife in hand. The bird perched on the edge of the rock, chirping softly as if drawn to the markings. Marina traced the grooves with her fingers, feeling their sharp edges. These symbols were deeper, more deliberate, as if carved with precision rather than weathered over time. In the center of the rock was a shallow indentation, perfectly round, as if designed to hold something. Marina's mind raced with possibilities. She placed the rusted compass she had found in the ridge's chamber into the indentation. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a faint vibration emanated from the rock, resonating through her fingers and into the ground beneath her. The bird let out a startled chirp, hopping back as the symbols began to glow faintly, their edges outlined in pale light. Marina stepped back, her heart pounding. The glow faded as quickly as it had appeared, leaving the clearing in silence. She retrieved the compass, its rusted surface unchanged, and turned her attention back to the symbols. Whatever she had activated, it was part of something larger, something she was only beginning to understand. As she made her way back to her camp, Marina's thoughts churned with questions. The island wasn't just testing her endurance. It was communicating, guiding her towards something she couldn't yet comprehend, and she was determined to uncover its purpose. The jungle, now quiet and glistening with rain, felt less like an adversary and more like a living, breathing entity. Marina's steps were steadier, her resolve stronger. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was unraveling the mysteries of the island, one piece at a time. That night, as the stars re-emerged in the clear sky, Marina sat by her rekindled fire, the bird perched contentedly beside her. She stared at the compass in her hand, its needle trembling faintly, and whispered to the darkness, "We're getting closer." With Muse attentively beside her, Marina stood on the ridge's highest point, her breath catching in the crisp morning air. The storm's aftermath had left the jungle below glistening in hues of emerald and gold. From this vantage, she could see the endless expanse of ocean surrounding the island, its surface calm and shimmering under the early sunlight. The sight was breathtaking, but it also underscored the isolation that had become her reality. Today was a pivotal day. Marina had spent the last several days gathering materials and refining her tools for one purpose: to send a signal, a cry for help that might pierce the vast emptiness around her. She clutched the rusted compass in her hand, its needle trembling faintly. Though its origin and purpose remained mysterious, it had become her talisman, a small reminder of resilience and direction. The bird, now stronger and more animated, perched nearby, watching her with bright, curious eyes. It had taken to following her movements closely, chirping occasionally as if to offer encouragement. Marina smiled faintly. "This is it," she said softly. "Let's see if someone's out there." She had chosen the ridge for its height and openness. The jungle below offered little visibility, but from here, any smoke would rise high and be visible for miles. Marina had gathered dry branches and strips of bark to create a large signal fire. She arranged the materials in a careful pyramid, leaving room for airflow and ensuring the fire would burn bright and steady. The wind picked up slightly as she struck the first match. The flame flickered precariously but held, catching on to the dry kindling. Marina fed the fire slowly, watching as the flames grew, licking hungrily at the larger branches. Soon, thick smoke began to rise, curling upward in dark, billowing plumes. She stood back, shielding her eyes from the heat, and watched as the signal took form against the clear blue sky. "Come on," she whispered, her voice carried away by the wind. "Let someone see it." Hours passed as Marina tended the fire, ensuring it stayed strong and steady. The bird flitted around her, chirping occasionally and settling on her shoulder between its explorations. The sun climbed higher, its heat bearing down on her as she worked. Sweat dripped down her brow, but she refused to let the fire falter. This was her chance, perhaps her only one, to reach the outside world. As the afternoon stretched on, Marina's hope began to waver. The smoke rose high and true, but the ocean's vastness seemed indifferent, swallowing her signal into its endless expanse. She scanned the horizon repeatedly, her eyes searching for any hint of movement, a shadow, a light, anything. Just as despair began to creep in, she saw it. A faint glimmer on the water, far in the distance. Marina froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She blinked, convinced her tired eyes were playing tricks on her, but the glimmer remained. It grew brighter, larger, until it resolved into a shape, a vessel, cutting through the waves with purpose. Marina let out a cry, a mix of relief and disbelief. She grabbed her satchel and pulled out a reflective piece of metal she had salvaged from the wreckage. Holding it up, she angled it toward the sun, sending flashes of light toward the approaching ship. The bird, sensing her excitement, chirped loudly and took flight, circling above the fire as if adding its voice to her signal. The ship drew closer, its outline becoming clearer with each passing moment. Marina's hands trembled as she waved the metal frantically, her voice hoarse from shouting. The fire roared beside her, its smoke a beacon against the blue sky. She could see figures on the deck now, their movements deliberate as they adjusted course toward the island. Tears streamed down Marina's face as the ship came to a stop just offshore. A small boat was lowered into the water, and two figures climbed in, rowing steadily toward the beach. Marina scrambled down the ridge, her steps hurried and uneven as she made her way to the shore. The bird flew ahead of her, its cries echoing through the jungle. By the time Marina reached the beach, the boat had landed. Two men stepped out, their faces etched with concern and curiosity. One of them raised a hand in greeting, his voice carrying over the sound of the waves. "Are you all right?" Marina nodded, unable to speak through the lump in her throat. She stumbled forward, her body trembling with exhaustion and relief. The men caught her as she reached them, steadying her and helping her into the boat. The bird landed on her shoulder, its weight a comforting presence, as she finally allowed herself to breathe. The journey back to the ship was surreal. Marina stared at the island as it receded into the distance, its dense jungle and towering ridge bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun. It looked almost peaceful, its mysteries and challenges now part of her story. She clutched the compass tightly, a symbol of everything she had endured and learned. Once aboard the ship, Marina was given water, food, and a blanket. The crew listened intently as she recounted her experience, their faces a mix of awe and disbelief. When she mentioned the symbols, the hum, and the chamber on the ridge, their expressions grew somber. One of them, an older man with weathered features, nodded thoughtfully. "There are places like that," he said quietly. "Places that hold secrets we're not meant to understand. You're lucky to have made it out." Marina didn't argue. The island had tested her in ways she couldn't have imagined, but it had also shown her the depths of her own strength. As the ship sailed toward the horizon, she sat on the deck, the bird perched beside her, and watched the stars emerge one by one. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of peace. She had survived, and though the island's mysteries remained, she knew they would stay with her, a reminder of her resilience and the power of hope. The ship's gentle sway on the open sea was both comforting and unfamiliar to Marina. She sat quietly on the deck, her hands cradling the rusted compass that had been her guide through the island's trials. The bird perched on the ship's railing nearby, its head tilted as it gazed at the horizon. Together, they watched the island shrink into the distance, its dense jungles and rocky ridges fading into a silhouette against the vast expanse of ocean. Marina's thoughts were a whirlwind. The island had challenged her in ways she never imagined, forcing her to confront fears and doubts she had carried long before the crash. It had been both her adversary and her teacher, revealing a strength within her she had never known. Now, as the ship carried her toward safety, she felt a pang of loss mingled with her relief. The island, its mysteries, its dangers, and its beauty had become a part of her. The captain approached her, his footsteps steady on the wooden deck. He was a grizzled man with kind eyes that held a depth of understanding. "We'll reach the mainland by tomorrow," he said, his voice low and calm. "You'll be able to contact your people. Let them know you're safe." Marina nodded, her fingers tracing the compass's edges. "Thank you," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The captain hesitated, then gestured toward the compass. "That little thing kept you alive, didn't it?" She smiled faintly. "It's more than that. It's a reminder that even when everything seems lost, there's always something to hold on to, a direction, a purpose." He nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer, and left her to her thoughts. The night fell quickly, the stars emerging in a dazzling display across the dark sky. Marina lay on her cot below deck, the gentle creak of the ship's timbers lulling her into a sense of calm. But sleep didn't come easily. Her mind kept returning to the symbols, the hum of the tree, and the strange vibrations she had felt in the chamber. She dreamed of the island again, this time not as a place of danger, but as a puzzle she had only begun to solve. The symbols seemed to shift and change in her mind, their meaning just out of reach. She saw the faces of those who had come before her, their voices whispering of challenges met and lessons learned. When she woke, the first light of dawn was creeping into the cabin. As the mainland appeared on the horizon, a rush of emotions washed over Marina. Relief, gratitude, and an overwhelming sense of accomplishment filled her chest. The crew gathered on the deck, pointing and calling out as the coastline grew clearer. Marina joined them, her heart pounding with anticipation. She could see the faint outline of a harbor, bustling with activity even at this early hour. When the ship docked, Marina stepped onto solid ground for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The world felt both familiar and strange, its noise and movement a stark contrast to the island's stillness. The crew helped her arrange transportation and a way to contact her loved ones. As she stood by the docks, the bird fluttered to her shoulder, its bright eyes scanning the busy harbor. "You're free to go," she said softly, stroking its feathers. "You don't have to stay with me anymore." But the bird didn't move. It chirped once, settling comfortably on her shoulder, as if to say that their bond was not so easily broken. Marina smiled, her heart swelling with affection for the small creature that had been her companion through the darkest days. In the weeks that followed, Marina reconnected with her family and friends, recounting her story to those who would listen. The island became a symbol of her resilience, its lessons shaping the way she approached life. She kept the compass on her desk, a constant reminder of the direction she had found within herself. But the mysteries of the island never truly left her. Late at night, she would find herself sketching the symbols from memory, their meaning tantalizingly close, yet elusive. She wondered if she would ever return, not as a survivor, but as an explorer, seeking to uncover the truths hidden in its depths. One evening, as she stood by her window watching the sun dip below the horizon, Marina felt the bird hop onto her shoulder. It chirped softly, its presence a comforting weight. She looked out at the sea, its waves shimmering in the fading light, and whispered, "Maybe one day." The bird chirped again, as if in agreement. For now, Marina was content. The island had tested her, shaped her, and given her a story unlike any other. And though its secrets remained, she carried its lessons with her. A reminder that even in the face of the unknown, there was always a way forward. Always hope. Bookmark back. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the Lost Island. If this story brought you comfort or a sense of peace, we hope you'll share it with friends and loved ones. Don't forget to join us again for more relaxing tales that help you unwind and drift into calm. Wishing you a restful night and the sweetest dreams. Until next time.